All right. Well, welcome everyone to our latest graveyard shift. Just a reminder, the purpose of this podcast is to provide you with some ideas and inspiration on improving your funeral home's operations and connecting your business with more families. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by Passari. And my name is Todd Carlson, and I'm the Chief Sales Officer with Directors Investment Group and our family of companies, which includes Passari and Funeral Directors Life and Claim Check. And we're really excited to have our cast of characters back. They continue to return. This is 8 in a row. And so I'm shocked by how quickly time is flying here and how much fun we're having. And hopefully we're creating. Yeah. The over under I think was like 3 on this, so we're well over. But hey, our cast today again, we've got Matt Bailey here from Connecticut, Bailey Family Funeral Homes, and Gary Freitag from Spring Grove in Ohio, and Jimmy Lucas from our very own Texas representing us today. And by the way, we'd love to hear your feedback along the way. We'd love for you to send your thoughts, your feedback, and in the rare case we make any form of sense, send your compliments to the Graveyard Shift at Passari.com. That is the Graveyard Shift at Passari.com. And again, today, Jimmy agreed to handle complaints. So, send those to Jimmy at complaints.com. So he's got those. All right. Hey, we are here. We're really excited to have our guest, Ron Clyde, with us today. And, Ron, I think can relate to this, but, as we talk with funeral professionals around the country, the one thing that we hear often, it's just never been harder than it is right now to be a funeral professional. So we hope that today's content will help our funeral professionals who are listening in today. And we're hoping that they can benefit from the content that we're providing. So Ron, Director of Special Projects at Directors Investment Group, a very distinguished title there, Ron. Actually, Ron, surprisingly, I kid Ron. Ron is a great guy. We're in a workout group in the mornings every morning at 5:45. So we're a little punchy. We've been up a while, but he has a master's degree in education and a graduate certificate in conflict management from Abilene Christian University. Jimmy.
So what do you guys wear when you work out? You tights or what are we talking?
Sometimes nothing at all.
That sounds like the Abilene way.
Yeah, so tights, yeah. We like to call them yoga pants. By the way, for our listeners, if you don't know this, Abilene Christian University is due west of Harvard University.
Is it?
And it's also due west of Ranger College, right, Jimmy?
That's
so,
right.
So, Jimmy, I thought we should.
Oh my gosh! That is awesome.
So we've got
your IQ level just dropped when you put that hat on.
For those listening at home, we're now donning our Ranger College hats.
Oh my God. I was asked to leave that college. That was an awesome moment in time.
All right. Well, hey, Jimmy, so every time Gary says something smart and Jimmy says something, what's the opposite of smart? We'll be kind. We're going like that. So
okay,
that's put the tags on in case I want to return it.
You're going to return that.
It's like a suit for a wedding.
Oh, yeah, God, that's amazing. I love you guys.
Yeah. So, anyways, well, hey, Jimmy, we're just waiting for that moment there. But Ron, back to our special guest here. And we love, we've got Ron here to talk to us about taking a little deep dive into conflict management within the funeral service workspace. So, hey, Ron, I just wanted to open up here with a question for you. When you think about the average funeral director and kind of how they view conflict in the context of their role at the funeral home, what kind of conflicts do you think most funeral directors have in mind?
Well, I mean, I think when most people think about conflict, they think about it as a bad day at the office or teenagers in the house, and what's unfortunate, but what's very true is it takes on a different context in the mortuary worker in the funeral profession. I'd like to set context if I can, Todd.
Sure.
So if you were to walk into a supermarket or into a football game, anywhere in the general population, about 8% of the people you would meet are suffering from, PTSD. Everyone knows that, right? post-traumatic stress disorder. So about 8%, 8 out of 100 are just really suffering from stress. Listen, if you were an Iraqi war veteran, about 17% of us would be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. But there was a study, Gary, it was from Harvard, so I know it's good, among mortuary workers. Are you ready? 28.5% of mortuary workers suffer from diagnosable PTSD.
Wow.
I mean, that it is a tremendous problem. And I think, at least my theory, is that it's such a problem, we don't see it anymore. It's kind of like smog in Los Angeles in the 80s. You know, it's causing harm, but it's just so present, we don't even recognize it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for setting it up, Ron. And Matt and Gary, I just like your feedback on kind of that kind of a little bit of a, and it's a Harvard study, Gary. It's got to be accurate. So we know that.
Yeah.
Now, if it had been a Ranger Community College study, that's a different story. But I love your feedback on the group's feedback on just some of those statistics and what you think of it.
I'd just be curious, Ron. When do you know when that study was?
Yeah. Matt, that's a great question. You might think it's COVID, right?
Well, I was wondering if it's before or after.
Yeah. It was 1999, pre-COVID.
So 1999 or 2019?
2019.
Yes.
Right, good thing I read the study.
Showing our age.
2019. Listen, but the deal is, they did a COVID study, and during the COVID period, it bumped up to about 50%. Wow. So during COVID, about half of you guys were all really struggling with stress, and you can say stress and conflict are very closely related.
Yeah, no, that's good feedback. So, what kind of conflicts, kind of categories of conflict do you see in the Spring Grove, in your environment there?
Well, you've got, inherently the families you serve, the significant portion of them are going through similar, whether it's the stages of grief or PTSD or whatever. So they're not rational. And when you get in that kind of conflict, you have to sort of disassociate yourself with the fact that they're not mad at you, they're mad at the world. And you just have to listen. There's nothing you can do to ease their pain other than just listen and nod and empathize. The surprising part for me is the conflict between our professional staff outside the family interaction. And I've actually said this to them because of answers on employee surveys, that you guys are a lot meaner to each other than you are to the people that you're working with. And that really surprised me, because they tend to be empathetic people that, understand, but with each other, they don't act that way, or a lot of them don't. Let's put it that way. And I know you're putting stress on them, and there's other reasons for that, but it kind of stood out to me as not necessarily following my assumptions. The amount of, I don't know what the right word to use, cattiness, backbiting, that kind of stuff that goes on between the staff that makes it even worse when you then have to go face a family. So that to me was kind of eye-opening.
Yeah. I agree. And actually, I think there's a good reason for it that I hope to talk about today. But totally, employee on employee conflict, it's common everywhere, right? But it seems it perhaps is even worse where we work.
Yeah, Gary, I think my take on that, and again, I know many of your people, and they're really good people. I think the premise that Ron has is that when families are faced with grief and they're not handling conflict, it comes out sideways. The grief comes out sideways and we don't deal with it. So does when we're working in the fog of stress, then the reaction to stress kind of comes out sideways if we don't find good ways of dealing with it. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So, Jimmy, what do you guys see at your funeral home when it comes to the stressors in the workplace and how that can lead potentially to conflict?
As it pertains to families or coworkers?
Either one, your pick.
So with families, I full-heartedly believe that you're visiting with folks that are out of control of life and situations altogether. So giving them that control back, and I think you can do that with permission statements, is key in moving forward in those conversations, because they have no control. And so how do we do that? And how do we walk softly through that? I did have a follow-up question for Gary about what backbiting means to him.
Getting personal here.
Yeah. Yep. As it, we do a lot of professional development here. So for our coworkers, the conversation is often the importance of how we handle our families that are trusting us at life's most difficult time. As important is how are we treating one another. To Ron's point, I would share that the statistics is much higher with just life and crap that we all deal with in our regular day. I always share with coworkers that the person next to you may be going through a divorce, may be going through cancer treatments, may have someone in their family going through this, an illness. And so we're not always going to have our best day. So how do we treat one another so that we can best treat the families that are trusting us to care for them? I think that ongoing dialogue, it sets the mood for culture in any business. And being a social worker, that's always one of those things that have just come natural to me. So just walk softly, and have conversations, find people doing things right, not wrong, I think is big.
No, I would say the same as everyone else. I think one of the things I've heard conversations about profession wide with folks too has been, and I think we may have talked about this a little bit on a previous episode, is a generational shift that we see happening in our profession, and the way that people navigate those stressors and those difficult conversations has changed. Mm-hmm. You go back and we have a lot of people, they began their career working when it was all male, and it was most, not all, but much next generation people working, mm-hmm. and that it was a different set of times and standards, and the apprentice was an indentured servant, and that was what you expected for your years of service and things. And that's, we have a generation of mortuary students that are coming out that is very different than that. And the way they interact is very different than that. And how they deal with conflict is very different than that. So I think, at my place of employment, we tend to be in a similar age group. So we don't see as much of it where I am, but I do hear a lot of it. And I was at a training session or an event, I think it was last year, and there was a young lady who was attending it, who was in tears, questioning if she should actually continue and work within our profession because of some interactions that she had with like her preceptors and people that she was doing stuff with. And honestly, the room was kind of divided. And there were people in the room who were like, well, you need to pull on your adult pants and get over it. And then there were other people who were saying like, you do you, and don't, that's how it is. So I don't know if there's easy answers to these questions. And I think it's not just our profession alone. I think it's, across society, we're trying to figure out how to navigate these things. But I think those are areas where we see real potential for conflict that could have real impacts on our work environments.
Yeah. Matt, if I can, let me say this. And Todd talks about this a lot. There's huge burnout in the first 5 years of a brand new worker. And I'm going to say if we did a better job of managing conflict in the industry, in our individual funeral homes, I think people would last longer. I think it's part of the burnout.
No, and I agree. So, hey, Ron, if you could share a little bit about, we talked a couple of concepts here, maybe some of the ways that, the average listener is kind of thinking about conflict. They kind of tend to talk about family conflict. I think this group did the same thing. They kind of go there.
Yeah.
And then Gary and alluded to, and Matt, or excuse me, and Jimmy to, the interpersonal conflict amongst the funeral home. But what some other ways that you think conflict is misunderstood in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, there's probably, there's many, but I'm going to, there are 4 ways, in my opinion, that conflict is rampant in the industry. Number one, these are going to maybe catch you off guard and honestly might trigger, but let's just go with it. Number one, identification with the deceased. How many of you have said, this could have been me, or this could have been my child? That identification with the deceased causes tremendous internal conflict. Number two, stigma. We sometimes feel stigmatized in the industry that we work in. Sometimes we feel like society is judging us, and that can produce a lot of conflict, family, funeral director, but also just in life. I also want to say this, and this is quantified. The exposure to traumatic death causes great stress and internal conflict. So these are things that are just part of our industry. But Todd, what do you think the number one cause of predictor of PTSD is?
Well, let me take a wild guess here with my Ranger Community College hat on. I'm going to say having dinner with Jimmy Lucas.
Close, very close.
All right.
It actually, look, number one, 46% of the causes of PTSD in this study was attributed to avoidance and to avoidance of the conflict. Yeah. So I'm going to say to you that the number one reason that conflict is so damaging is because we don't deal with it. And it leaks. It leaks sideways, or the opposite of sideways.
I would say that we have a saying here at our funeral home that clear is kind. And if we don't lean into hard or difficult conversations, we're not being kind. And you can say it in a respectful way, but people need to know when they're not hitting the mark. Not saying you got to knock it out of the park every time, but having those conversations, people want that feedback. And so clear is kind, and followed by close the loop when it comes to communication. Those are expectations that should be part of a company culture. And I think if you're leaning into that, clear is kind, closing the loop, I think your conflict within intercompany, within the funeral space, the funeral profession, that's a good step forward. If you're trying to change that and you're seeing what you're talking about, Ron, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
That's worth at least a nickel. That's more than 2 cents.
I'm not going to give you any change.
Yeah. That's also what Jimmy paid for tuition at Ranger Community College.
It's a funny story about that. I had to become a roofer once I was asked to leave there for a semester. This body's not built to roof. I don't know if you knew that.
Is that where you met Ron, Jimmy? Is that how you met Ron?
Ron and I met in a prison out in West Texas. We were cellmates, and that's where we took this conflict resolution class together. He ended up getting a certificate. I just got paroled. So that's where we hail from.
Oh, man. Hey, well, this is, I don't know if this is the time, but we're going to call it. So time to remind our listeners, this is the Graveyard Shift, and we'd love to hear your feedback at thegraveyardshift@basari.com. And also, hey, Ron, let's talk a little about, you used in our prep work, you used an analogy about, we see these traffic circles or these roundabouts getting put in all over the country. So talk a little bit about the analogy that you shared about the roundabout as a way to visualize for our listeners, the way they could visualize, how conflict and avoidance and all of that works.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Todd. So, guys, everybody visualize, for our listeners at home, visualize a traffic circle, a turnabout. What do you guys call it in your neck of the woods? Turnbuckle, roundabout?
Roundabout.
Right? You've got this, you've got
opportunity.
Say it again.
Opportunity.
Yeah, there you go. So you've got entrances and exits, and everyone's driving their cars in the circle. All right. So you're going to enter the roundabout of conflict in a disagreement. You don't know the source, but it's going to happen. Somebody's going to disagree. Family, friends, close, we're going to disagree. So you enter the circle. Okay. Your first exit is avoidance. And look, we've got a lot of amiables working, trying to make people happy. And the most common technique for dealing with conflict is avoidance. But here's the thing, it's a false exit because it wraps right back around into the turnabout. And if you go around the circle, you can resolve it and you can exit the conflict. But if you don't exit the conflict with resolution, you face it, you deal with it, it's going to turn into dispute. And dispute is a fancy word for call the lawyer. It gets very, very serious if you don't resolve the conflict. All right, what happens when you don't resolve the conflict? It goes through resolution, it goes through dispute. You don't exit the circle. And more cars come on to the turnaround, to the turnabout. And pretty soon, you're looking at a whole lot of mess, a lot of congested traffic. So the analogy is it's going to happen. You do have options, and the way that you deal with those options is going to make all the difference. You can exit conflict, but you can't avoid it, and you got to face it.
Yeah, good advice there. Any feedback, Matt? What's your thought about that?
I think conflict avoidance is kind of, it's almost habit forming, and it's really it's a personality type thing. And I think, and I've seen there are people who just go head in and they go right to the conversation and the hard conversations, and there are people that will avoid it every time. So I just wonder, Ron, if you have any is that a learned skill? Is it possible to learn to move beyond conflict avoidance, and what are some tools that people could use to try to not do that?
I mean, honestly, I was surprised that it's a degree.
No one's more surprised than you.
Jimmy, a degree is something you get after you spend time at college.
I thought he was talking about a compass. He was talking about roundabouts and then degrees, and so I wasn't sure where he was going.
Yeah, it was
60 degrees. Is that a temperature or a point?
Four left turns.
It is a learned skill. It's something that there are techniques and ways to approach it, and they do vary by your personality type. So everyone can, even if it doesn't come really naturally, everyone can learn how to adequately deal with conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that personality, Matt, is a really good thing to think about because, depending on, there's different ways to kind of categorize or classify personality types. Where we spend our days here at work, we kind of lump them into four kind of general categories. You have, so the amiable that Ron mentioned, someone who is naturally conflict avoidant, but the opposite of that is the driver who is naturally leans into conflict. Just because they lean into conflict doesn't mean they're handling it in a healthy way, right? And then on the other side, you also have what we would in the language we share around here, the expressive, and the way they would deal with conflict is very different too, because they take the feedback they would get from Jimmy's kind and clear coaching as an attack, so they tend to attack back. That's their kind of avoidance maneuver, and then the on the other corner of the grid is the analytical, and they feel disrespected sometimes when they get coaching. So, and all of that then creates its own kind of acting out behavior when it comes to what we call backup behavior. It's kind of how when it comes out sideways, which is a new thing now that we're talking about. It comes out in different ways. So understanding the people also helps you understand and maybe even predict how they might respond to stress in their backup modes.
Yeah, let me give you 4 ways people respond. And it very much is dependent on their personality and the circumstances. But we've already talked about number 1, avoidance, right? That's lose-lose. Nobody wins. Another way of responding is compliance, that kind of a passive-aggressive whatever, and you give in. It really doesn't resolve anything. The third method is actually effective and often used, and that's competition. I'm gonna resolve this, and I'm gonna win. And then, of course, where everyone wants to get to the win-win-win of collaboration, where you're listening to the other party, and your goal is to work to a mutually agreeable and beneficial solution. Oftentimes it's creative and it requires us to give and to take, but collaboration is where you want to go. But often we get mired in compliance. I just give up, or we get mired in avoidance.
So have you guys, just ask a question to the panel here. What do you see, as far as those different ways of dealing with conflict? What do you see maybe in yourself? What do you tend to, how do you tend to reply or respond? How do you tend to respond to conflict? And what have you learned about yourself and and a lesson you could share?
I'll go first, Todd. I actually, at a point in time earlier in my life, was working with a healthcare professional on this kind of thing, a therapist, because I was a complete avoidance. I just accept it, swallow it, move on. I don't know whether I was taking the high road thinking I was being a bigger person or whatever, but it's not healthy. And the two techniques that I worked on that have really helped me is, number one, I don't accept feedback as well, and I can't give difficult feedback as well when I'm emotionally amplified. So I try to if it's in a stressful situation, give me 12 hours, let me sleep on it, and then you'll get a reasonable conversation. The second thing that I think really helps is starting those conversations with disarming language, acknowledging the fact, hey, this is going to be a difficult conversation, because then the recipient knows, hey, I already know this is going to be difficult for you to hear, but I'm empathetic to that, but I still need to get it out. And it allows the recipient to, okay, I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt, and I'm not going to get defensive on minute one, because they've acknowledged, hey, this is difficult feedback, but we need to address it. And so I'm more open to that kind of feedback. And so those two things have really helped, allow me to dive into a difficult conversation, and also not to have it. The term I was given is when you're emotionally flooded. And we've talked about this in an earlier podcast. If a family just spent 45 minutes yelling at you because something went wrong at a funeral, don't go talk to the funeral director right away. Let those emotions settle before you go have the conversation. It'll be much more productive.
Yeah. Gary, I think your Harvard education's paying off, because, that idea of disarming comments at the beginning, I love that, because I think what you're doing there is just being very intentional about broadcasting a positive intent, right?
Yeah.
That you're broadcasting, that you want, your intentions are positive and your goals are positive, and sometimes we forget to say that as human beings, to say, hey, I want this to go well, and to be very overt about that for the person that we're communicating with, for their benefit and ours. I mean, if we're attempting to resolve the conflict. So any feedback from Jimmy or Matt on a way that conflict got in the way of something that you were trying to accomplish and how you worked to resolve it? Then we got a couple other questions to throw out to Ron here before we wrap.
I thought Gary's comments were relevant.
That's relevance, a big word, Jimmy. That's good. That's good.
I did look it up before I said it, so
I thought he was Googling.
Gary was spot on. No, Gary, I'm sorry, Matt. Gary was spot on. I think acknowledging that it's going to be a difficult conversation, and then with this conversation, what we hope to get to the end is we walk out of here together, united as a team. So it's that middle part that if you can articulate that and lean into it, I'm definitely a lean into conflict guy. I should probably take a breath before I lean into it sometimes. Sorry, Matt.
No, that was an excellent observation, Jimmy. I think it was fantastic.
Thank you for acknowledging me, Matt.
You're welcome.
there's
Pause here, Ron. I think Matt,
No, I was just going to add another thing I think is relevant, and this is what, whether it's with a family that's having a conflict or someone that we work with. I think just letting people be heard and letting them know that they're being heard, and being intentional about listening to what they're saying and not just listening to prepare your response, but to really hear them, even if you disagree with them. And there are times I've had conversations with people where they don't like circumstances and things that are outside of our control. And it's like, well, we have licensure laws, and that's how things have to be, or that's how we have to function, and that's how we have to operate. And it's, if you have another plan, bring it forward, and I'd love to hear it. And I understand that it might be burdensome, or it might be unpleasant, or it might be something that we wouldn't design it that way, but it's the reality of our circumstances. If I have a family that wants to have a Catholic mass, funeral mass on Good Friday, it's not going to be allowed. The church is not going to accommodate that. And they may chew me up and down 6 ways to Sunday about that and say that that's unacceptable. We have to do it before we're flying out of the country. And I could, and I'm not going to be able to change that. That's going to be the rule. We're not going to be able to do it. But the way I interact with that conversation is just trying to let them know that I have heard them, that I understand they're really upset about it. I understand why they're upset about it. I'm sorry they're upset about it. If I had the power to change it, I would change it. Being that we don't, what's our plan B?
So, yeah.
Like the power of the Holy Spirit?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, Ron, I think one thing we might want to just kind of discuss just for a minute is there any way that conflict can be used in a healthy way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that actually, if you think about it, that is health. No pain, no gain, whatever, you and I, Todd, working out, we're constantly talking about how we're making progress through the pain, right?
Yeah.
And there's ancient wisdom. I love this verse in the Bible. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Well, what happens when iron clashes? Sparks fly, right? And so a really healthy approach is to look for conflict as an opportunity for improvement. I mean, it's going to happen. And like Matt was alluding to, that active listening is just so important, but it can often produce a superior result, not just an amicable agreement.
I find my time with Jimmy sharpens me every time I'm with him.
Exactly.
I've never felt that.
I'm not sure that's how that works.
Gary dulls the blade.
Gary, take 12 hours to rethink your last comment.
No.
Awesome.
So really, it is. And we teach, not teach techniques and different approaches to it, but the goal is not to run away. The goal is to embrace, to listen, to be empathetic, and to truly have the greater good in mind, and to not be intimidated by conflict. It's going to happen. What are you going to do about it? That makes all the difference.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Ron. Hey, as we wrap up here, we've talked a lot about conflict management, resolution, how to resolve conflict. Also, I think the importance of avoiding conflict, if I can say that in a very Ranger Community College way.
Can we talk about that later?
Yeah. So yes, yeah. Let's. Yeah. Well, not really. I really kind of. I'm on
next episode.
Yeah,
I am uncomfortable with that.
I don't feel safe anymore.
So, hey, but so Ron, what is there anything that we've left out when it comes to maybe some tips you could give us to making sure that we're handling conflict in a healthy way in our businesses?
Yeah, as business leaders and as business owners, I just want to encourage you guys to recognize it. When you're in smog, you just forget it's there. And like my underarms, sometimes I just forget they stink. And, we gotta talk about it. And so I think really acknowledging as business leaders, if we acknowledge to our staff that we're going to experience conflict, and also acknowledge that it leaks. You can't come out of a painful arrangement conference and it not affect your relationships with your family or your relationships with your coworkers. And so the way, again, get out of the circle, right? Resolve the conflict, work it appropriately so that it doesn't accumulate. I think that's where we're seeing the really bad impact of conflict in our industry is that it's not being resolved.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Hey, Ron, thank you so much for your time today. And I think we're about at the end of our shift here. And I just really want to say thanks for your insight and your leadership and the way that you are, communicating with funeral professionals across the country on a very important topic like this. And and by the way, panel, thank you for your insight and always your vulnerability. I think that's one thing that makes this podcast a little bit special is your willingness to share. And to our listeners,
welcome,
you're welcome. You're welcome, Jimmy. You're welcome. Very much welcome. Hey, to our listeners, again, thanks for tuning into another episode of The Graveyard Shift. Really appreciate your investment of your time and your resources and your commitment to improving yourself and your business and your coworkers. So we'd love to hear from you. So again, shoot us an email at thegraveyardshift@basari.com with your thoughts, your comments, your ideas. Email Jimmy with your complaints. I'm sure he'll pass them along. And also, like and subscribe and share off your favorite podcast platform. We love that. I think the more people that we can share with and talk about these very important issues, the more benefit we can all have in our profession. So thank you for that. Again, put something you learned in use today. Have a great day.